So a lot of you saw on Instagram that I was shooting with the X Pro 2. You saw it in my stories, and I got like 5 or 6 messages. Yo, what the hell is that? Is that that? Is that X Pro 2? How is it? How is it? And I ignored you all because I wanted to keep a surprise for this video. My God, this camera is amazing. My God.
Bad times turn to good memories. Smile. Even when I'm gone and you remember me. Smile. Good times never fade away. Smile. Even if I'm not what you hear.
What is the deal, beautiful people? It's your boy Ramon, Lifestyles Defined. Let's talk about this Fuji X Pro 2. My God, what a pleasurable device to use. Pleasurable camera. Do people consider cameras devices? Whatever. Before I get started in the review, I want to give you guys some context, and I want to walk you guys along the logical journey I had to walk before I got my hands on this thing. So I purchased my Sony A7, which is a full frame camera, for exactly that. I wanted balls to the wall performance. I wanted the best there was, and that's where I arrived at my budget. Fine. From there, even though I was shooting video for the channel with the A7, I wanted 4K. I wanted 4K video. So I went out and I got a G7, which is what I'm shooting on right now. And then I started to see, okay, this G7 is a precision instrument. This thing, although, and you guys can check out the review I did of that a while back, although it takes really good pictures, this thing is just, this is my 4K beast, and I love it for that. And then I got my hands on an Olympus OMD EM10. I keep getting tripped up on these names, and that I quickly saw was liberating for me on a day-to-day basis, because walking around with my A7 was so heavy, it was too much. But oh my God, it's so hot in here. But the OMD was so much smaller, so much lighter. Even the lenses of Micro Four Thirds was lighter. So although it may not have matched the image quality of my A7, it was good enough, especially when it came to traveling, you know, and it was a lot cheaper because of that. So I really enjoyed that. So I've been in this place where, for all types of photography that I personally do and videography, I had an instrument. I had a dedicated camera. So when I got my hands on the Fuji, the X Pro 2, it was a weird thing for me, because, you know, I tried to logically place it somewhere within all of my cameras and say, okay, where does this thing fit in? What does it replace? So it doesn't replace my Sony, even though the A7 Mark II would be considered one of Sony's professional cameras, or pro enthusiast, whatever you would call it. And the X Pro 2 is Fuji's pro camera. Does it replace that? I don't think it does. There's some, first of all, there's IBIS on my A7 that I don't get on the Fuji. I mean, there's a ton of killer glass, and of course, it's not as big. And if it's not as big, it can't be as pro. Right? So it didn't quite replace it, and it wasn't a full frame sensor. So we all know that argument about the amount of light gathered, which is mute, because on this channel I praise Micro Four Thirds a lot. Whatever. It doesn't replace my Micro Four Thirds systems, because A, it doesn't shoot 4K like the G7, and B, it's not as small and light as the OMD, but it is not as big as the Sony. So this thing was very interesting to me to see where it fared within the range of cameras that I had. And then I took it out and I started to use it. My God, this camera is the business. I can see why there's a cult following behind Fuji. I love so many things about it. First off, we don't do a lot of, we don't get into the numbers here in the tech specs, but I think the two things you should know about this, or 2 or 3 things you should know about this camera. One, it's an APS-C sensor with 24 megapixels. So even though it's a smaller sensor than my A7, it's pushing out the same megapixel count, and it's doing that on a sensor that has proven excellent dynamic range and great color reproduction, and that is amazing. So let's take nothing away from it there. 2, it's got this optical viewfinder. We'll talk about that in a second, or this hybrid optical / EVF viewfinder. And then third, it's waterproofed. It's water sealed. Like, okay, now we're talking. So going back to the look and feel of this camera, I think this is one of the things that drew me into it. Without even turning it on, the first thing you notice is these knobs and dials. And that's sort of why I fell in love with the Olympus too, is because, in Sony, they're not as good at giving you these great big tactile feedback dials and wheels. But Olympus was, and I see now Fuji is just untouchable in this world. I haven't shot with a Leica yet, so I don't know what the hell goes on over there. But this thing is just amazing at what it does. First of all, I can't get enough at the fact that the aperture ring is on, the aperture settings are on a ring on the lens. That is amazing. And having shot with the Fuji with the aperture ring on the lens, it's like it doesn't make sense to have it anywhere else. My God, what an amazing experience. Then there's this shutter speed dial, and this thing goes up to 1/8,000th of it. That's just wildness. On top of that, it's got silent shutter. So wow, Fuji really brought the features home there. It's got that shutter dial that you can click, and you can dial in your shutter. And if you're paying attention, remember those shutter settings are by 2 times 2. So if you're on 800 and you want to go to 1600, then click, one click, right? And it becomes a mental thing where you don't need to look at the dial. You don't need to take your eyes away from the viewfinder. That is invaluable. And probably one of the only things I don't like about the camera is a few other drawbacks, but this I really don't like about the camera. Although I think it's cool that the little window cutout on the same dial for the shutter speed, you have the ISO settings and you pull that ring up and turn. It's a little cumbersome in practice. It looks cool as all hell, but it never really bothered me because I shoot auto ISO. So that was a non-issue for me. And then they've got the big exposure ring. It goes up to +3 or -3 on the exposure. And then in the settings, you can even change that to go as far as like ± 5. But nonetheless, I like a lot of the execution and the design here. I read comments that this camera is the poor man's Leica in terms of the design, and I kind of see it. It's got that real blocky, heavy metal, just sturdy feel and look to it, and it is as such. And I think that's super dope. I really did enjoy using it. And in terms of the tactile feedback and clicks of all of these rings, man, I couldn't have enjoyed that anymore. In fact, part of the learning process of using this camera that I really, really enjoyed was just figuring out how to get it in and out of modes. What do I mean by that? So there's no aperture or shutter priority mode on this camera, and I often shoot those two modes because I leave my ISO on auto. I do a lot of street photography, and I don't care to fumble with the ISO back and forth. And in fact, doing so on this little ISO mechanism could be a nightmare, to be honest with you. So I only shoot, based on what I think is important right now. My aperture, am I trying to get something in or out of focus, or am I trying to stop or stop motion or convey motion? So based on what I'm trying to do, I'll go either shutter or aperture priority mode. I could not for the life of me figure out how to do it for about 10 minutes. And then I said, wait a minute. There's these red A buttons, and if you put the aperture ring and the shutter dial on auto, it's on auto. So I said, well, let me just leave the opposite on auto and then control the other, and boom, there you was. Like, it's one of those things where it makes so much sense this way. Now I'm looking at all the cameras like, why don't you do that? But then they don't have this tactile feedback. But you get the point. I think it's super dope. I like so much about it. It's just an experience. I can't say much more about it. Using all the buttons on the camera, it's everything about it, I think, was an experience. And coming down to the hybrid optical EVF, this is something that I thought was genius on Fuji's behalf, because this is still a big topic of conversation in the photography world, because you have the DSLR guys on the right, and you have the mirrorless guys on the left, and everyone's trying to kill each other, and everyone's got these super strong arguments to why one is useless and the other is not. But the viewfinder, me personally, I quite enjoy EVFs because I like to see the setting of, I like to see the exposure and the settings live as I'm tweaking it, because I know what the image will come out. Yes, sure, I know how to shoot manual. I've been doing it for a while, and I know I've been shooting street and landscape for so long that I can conceptualize what settings I should have when I enter a scene. But that doesn't mean I want to just take a test shot and guess and then look at, well, not guess, but take a test shot and then review it. I oftentimes don't chimp. And that means, looking at the image after you take it. I don't do that. So for me, it's invaluable to look through the EVF, see my exposure, get it right, and I'm out. People have other opinions, and there are technical differences and strong points to each. For instance, the exposure thing, what I just explained to you, is a strong point of EVF. However, EVS, because they are a electronic reading off the sensor, it is not a real-time thing. It's as real-time as the technology will let it, so there can be a lag. Maybe not a noticeable lag on most cameras, certainly not the X Pro2, but if you were shooting something like sports, you would notice it, or so they say. It's all theory, because I don't shoot an optical viewfinder, so I can't weigh in. I do actually with my T4i, but that's not a sports camera. Whatever, you understand what I'm saying. With the optical viewfinder, the two strong points that I will give credence to, one is you can see it's generally a larger field of view than what you're actually taking in the picture. So you can see things come in and out of the frame, which is cool because when you're looking through the optical, you can account for subjects. You know when something's right, when it's not right, when your scene's about to change. Fine. Also, the thing I mentioned about it's not as it's better suited for sports because it's a one-to-one reproduction of the action, what's actually happened. So fine. Fuji, I say all that to say, what Fuji did here was genius. They gave you both. The best of both worlds. And it's a lever in the front of the camera that you can pull. And when you pull it, it switches from the EVF to the optical viewfinder. And in that optical viewfinder, it's got this range mode, which I think is super dope. Way beyond me to try to explain, but I like it. And it's weird because you see your frame, right? When you're in this EVF mode, this optical mode, you see a frame represented through the viewfinder, and then you can also see like part of your lens, and you're like, wait, what the hell is going on? But then you see the autofocus points in that frame, and you go, oh, whoa, this is kind of cool. I like it. I didn't shoot with it often. I quite enjoyed, and here's the thing about it, I did enjoy seeing a lot more of the scene in relation to my framing. I thought that was dope, particularly in street photography. I could see people coming in and out of the scene, and I would be able to compose them exactly where I wanted. That was cool. But I missed the ability to control or see my exposure as I was doing it. So I went back to EVF. Fine. What I think is the brilliance of what Fuji did here is they gave me, the photographer, the option. Invaluable. This thing also has two card readers. Now, I know there are people who shoot weddings out there, and yes, there's this thing about if you're not shooting Canon or Nikon, you're not a wedding photographer. Like, yeah, whatever, right? And those guys are out there. And I can see why there are Fuji wedding photographers these days, because having those two card slots, one for redundancy, for backup, invaluable. It has to be there. So I like that they really covered their bases here. The lenses, they got a bunch of primes that are like 1.4, unbelievable. So I was shooting with the 24 or 23 millimeter 1.4. I was shocked. Now the viewfinder on this guy, although it's not it doesn't flip or turn, which is, I get it. I've got a bunch of cameras that do that, and I often do use it actually, but whatever, all things can't be perfect. But the viewfinder on this thing is particularly beautiful. And I would take pictures and I'd look on the back of the viewfinder like, what the hell? This camera, this lens combo is amazing. But I knew better than that. You know, I waited till I got home. Like, all right, everything looks good on the back of a 2-inch screen. I think it's a 3-inch screen, whatever. But it's not until you get home and you put these things in Lightroom. My God. Now, like I said earlier, Fuji's known for this crazy color reproduction. They're known for this crazy dynamic range. All of this is true when looking at the images I got out of this. But I don't know what is the lens. If the lens is just a solid performer or the camera is just a solid performer, I'm going to go with somewhere squarely in the middle and say that the combination of Fuji cameras with Fuji lenses are insane. I can't convey to you just how sharp and how really, really good a lot of these images were. And it didn't matter if I was shooting this lens wide open at 1.4 or 5.6 or 8. Everything was beautiful. I think out of a possible 450 something shots that I took over the course of maybe a week and a half, I may have missed 3. I think 3 shots didn't come out right. And I think of those 3, 2 of them were me not choosing the right setting. But my God, what a pleasurable lens to use. What a pleasurable camera to use. The tactile feedback, I feel like it's just made for everything we want to do as a photographer. There isn't much. Okay, so F I'm being picky. I mentioned this thing with the ISO dial and how that's kind of silly to pull it up and turn. It's not the best in practice. But for me personally, I shoot auto ISO, so I put on all ISO and that was the end of that. The diopter button is not recessed, so taking it out of my bag, I would find that the diopter button kind of moved. And looking through it, I'm like, wait, why is this not clear? Got to adjust the diopter. So that was a thing. That was it. I mean, I really don't have much downsides to that camera. I like everything about it, and I was so happy to have the chance to really get an opportunity to shoot with this guy and understand a lot about Fuji's world. Would I recommend it? I would. I mean, you know, we got to have a conversation because a lot of people chase full frame cameras, and what I can tell you is when editing a lot of my pictures, I could pull shadows, I could drop highlights 100% each way in Lightroom like I can with my Sony. I could recover detail like nobody's business like I can with my Sony. And I see why a lot of people defended Fuji and say it doesn't matter that it's not a full frame camera. I see why Fuji skipped full frame and went straight to a medium format because they didn't need to go full frame. Getting this type of performance both pre and post is just kind of wild from an APS-C. I mean, this was just amazing. And then when you add into it, you throw on top the experience of shooting with a camera that's just as sturdy like this and weather sealed and built the way it is. And it's got this tactile use to it. You got all these knobs and dials and you don't need to look away from the viewfinder to get your settings right. Like, guys, this camera is literally the shit. I really do love this camera. I don't know. Currently, I saw they're on you can get them for about $1,600-$1,700 without a lens. I don't know if I can justify both the X-T2 and my A7 Mark II. I feel like they're one and the same. And only because I've got so many more lenses for my A7. But to be honest with you, I prefer the shooting experience with the Fuji for sure. 100%. And that's, guys, you know my Sony is my crown jewel, and that's a lot, man. Fuji really did a good job here. Let me know. It's been a long review. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed the images that's been flashing. You can get to see what this guy can do. All questions below are welcome. And I know if there's something I can't answer, I know the communities out there, we do have some Fuji shooters. Guys, you shoot your Fujis, you got this X Pro 2. Get down in the comment section. Help all the questions. Help out everyone else. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Like it if you like it. Subscribe to the channel. We got plenty more content coming, man. My name is Ramon. I'm out of here. Peace. Well, I guess. And the reason we started Lifestyles Defined is because if we weren't on camera arguing about these things, the technologies, the phones, the iPhones, the Androids, the cameras, the games, we'd be on the phone arguing about it. We'd be in each other's houses arguing about it. So why not just put it in front of a camera for everyone to enjoy it the way we do? That's what Lifestyles Defined is all about. We just